I don't tell this story often, not because I think people won't believe me, but because every time I go back to that night, I end up sleeping with the lights on for a week, and I'm a grown man. 32 years old. I don't scare easy, but something happened in my house that I have never been able to explain, and I need you to understand that every single detail I'm about to share is the truth. It was a Thursday in late November. My wife had taken our daughter to visit her mother about 3 hours upstate. They left that morning and weren't coming back until Sunday. I remember being almost excited about it. A few nights completely alone, no obligations. I could stay up late, eat garbage, and binge whatever I wanted on my laptop without anyone judging me. It felt like a small vacation. The first night was fine. Normal, I ordered food, watched a movie, fell asleep on the couch. Nothing happened. It was the second night that changed something inside me. I had stayed up later than I meant to. It was already past 1 in the morning when I finally turned off the television in the living room. The house dropped into this heavy, absolute silence the moment the screen went black. I sat there for a second, just adjusting to it. We live in a rural neighborhood on the edge of a small town. There are no streetlights nearby, no traffic. When it gets quiet out here, it gets quiet. The kind of silence that has a texture to it, almost like pressure against your ear. I picked up my phone and used its glow to navigate toward the kitchen. I wanted a glass of water before heading upstairs to bed. The phone's pale blue light carved this small tunnel of visibility in front of me, and everything outside of it was pure darkness. The kitchen was clean. My wife had left it spotless before she went. I filled the glass from the tap and leaned against the counter and drank it slowly, scrolling through my phone. The house clicked and ticked around me the way houses do when they're settling, and I didn't think anything of it. Then I heard something. It came from the hallway that connects the kitchen to the garage door. A single, soft sound, like a footstep on tile. Just one. I stopped scrolling and looked up. The hallway was completely dark. I stood there for maybe 10 full seconds, not breathing, just listening. Nothing followed. I told myself it was the house. Maybe the foundation shifting. Maybe a pipe. I put my glass in the sink and walked toward the stairs. I made it halfway up before I stopped again. There was a smell. Faint, but absolutely there. Cold alar. Like the kind of air that comes in from outside in late autumn. It wasn't a draft exactly. It was more like a pocket of cold that I had walked through. I stood on the stairs, one hand on the railing, and I looked back down into the dark living room below me. I couldn't see anything. The windows were just barely visible as gray rectangles against the black walls. I waited. I listened. The house gave me nothing. I continued up the stairs and went to bed. I didn't fall asleep right away. I lay there in the dark with my phone on my chest, staring at the ceiling. My bedroom door was open. I always leave it open out of habit. But that night it bothered me. The hallway beyond the door was a wall of black, and I became slowly aware that I was watching it. Not glancing. Watching. Like some deep lizard part of my brain had decided to stay alert without telling me why. I finally rolled over and closed my eyes. Sleep came slowly, in thin, restless layers. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone immediately. Something had pulled me out of sleep, but I couldn't identify what. I lay still and listened. The house was silent, but it was a different silence than before. It was the kind of silence that follows a sound, that ringing, electric absence that fills a room right after something has disturbed it. I knew, in my gut, that something had made a noise. I just hadn't been awake enough to catch it. I sat up slowly and looked toward the bedroom door. It was closed. A cold wave rolled through my chest. I had left it open. I was certain I had left it open. I always leave it open. I sat there staring at the door for what felt like a full minute, running through rational explanations. A draft. The hinges were slightly uneven. Maybe it swung shut on its own. It had never done that before in 4 years of living here. But there was a first time for everything. I told myself that. I repeated it silently like a prayer. I got up. I crossed the room. I opened the door slowly, and the hallway breathed that same cold air into my face. I looked left toward the bathroom. Dark, I looked right toward the stairs. Dark, I looked straight ahead at my daughter's bedroom door. which was directly across the hall. It was open about 4 inches. We keep that door closed. Always. My wife is particular about it. She keeps it closed to keep dust from settling on our daughter's things during the day, and she closes it every single night, out of habit. I had not been in that room. I had no reason to go in that room. It should have been shut. I stood in my doorway, staring at that narrow black gap in my daughter's door, and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child. Pure, irrational fear. Not a thought. A sensation. A full-body understanding that something was wrong. I turned on the hallway light. It buzzed to life, harsh and fluorescent, and I walked to my daughter's room and pushed the door open. The room was empty. Small bed with a pink comforter. Stuffed animals lined up on the shelf, window closed and locked. Nothing out of place. I checked the closet. I checked behind the door. Nothing. I went downstairs next. I turned on every single light as I went. The living room was empty. The kitchen was exactly as one had left it. My glass still in the sink. I checked the front door. Locked. Deadbolt engaged. I walked to the hallway that led to the garage door, the one where I had heard that footstep earlier. The garage door was unlocked. I opened it and looked into the garage. My car sat there alone under the bare bulb I had just flicked on. The garage was cold and smelled like concrete and oil. I looked at the large garage door that leads to the driveway. It was closed, but the side door, the small one that opens to the backyard, was slightly ajar, not wide open, just resting against the frame, as if someone had pulled it shut behind them but hadn't pushed it hard enough for the latch to catch. I did not go outside. I locked the side door. I locked the garage door behind me. I went through every room in the house, turning on every light, checking every window, every lock, every closet. I found nothing. No one. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. Nothing was visibly disturbed. But when I got back upstairs and walked into my bedroom, I stopped in the doorway. My phone was on the bed where I had left it. The screen was lit. I walked over and picked it up. The camera app was open, not the photos. The camera itself. It was on the front-facing mode, pointing up at the ceiling now, but it had been activated. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't touched my phone since I woke up. I checked my photos with shaking hands. The last image in my camera roll was a photo I had taken 2 days earlier. A picture of a receipt for my insurance. There was nothing new. No new photo. No new video. Just the app. Open. As if someone had been holding it and looking at the screen. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with every light in the house on and a kitchen knife on the cushion beside me, watching the front door until the sun came up. When my wife came home on Sunday, I told her what happened. She checked the house herself. She said I probably forgot to lock the side door and that the wind pushed it open. She said the phone thing was a glitch. She said I scared myself in an empty house late at night and let my imagination run. Maybe she's right. I've told myself she's right 100 times, but here's the thing I never told her. The thing I've never told anyone until now. When I was lying in bed, in those foggy seconds, right before I woke up at 2:47, right at the razor-thin edge between sleep and consciousness, I heard breathing, not mine. Close, inches away from my face, slow, steady, deliberate breathing, like someone standing over the bed and leaning down to listen to whether I was still asleep. And just before I opened my eyes, I heard the softest sound I've ever heard in my life. A single, careful footstep backing away from the bed. And then my daughter's bedroom door clicking gently shut across the hall. I don't leave my bedroom door open anymore. I need to talk about what happened to me last October because it has been sitting in my chest like a stone ever since. And I don't think I'll ever go back to that place. I don't think I'll ever go back to any place like it. What I experienced over those 3 nights in that cabin didn't just scare me. It rearranged something fundamental in my understanding of what it means to be truly alone. A friend of mine owns a small cabin about 40 minutes off the main highway in the northern part of the state, deep in a stretch of forest that borders federal land. He offered it to me because I'd been going through a rough patch. Divorce. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't focus. He said the quiet would die me good. Said he went up there every fall to disconnect, and that it always reset him. He gave me the key, drew me a rough map of the last few miles since GPS cuts out once you leave the paved road, and told me to enjoy the silence. The drive up was fine. Almost beautiful. The leaves had already turned, and the trees lining the gravel road formed this tunnel of deep reds and burnt orange. The cabin itself sat at the end of a long dirt path, tucked into a small clearing surrounded on all sides by dense pine and birch. Heat was modest. One room with a bed, a small kitchen area with a propane stove, a table, a wood-burning fireplace, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. There was no television, no internet. My phone showed one flickering bar of signal if I stood on the porch and held it above my head. But inside the cabin it was completely dead. The nearest town was a 25-minute drive back down the mountain, and the nearest neighboring property, according to my friend, was at least 3 miles through the woods to the east. The first night was peaceful. Primera ma, the fire cooked a simple dinner and sat on the porch as the sun went down. The forest changed as the light faded. It didn't just get dark, it transformed. The trees, which had looked warm and inviting during the day, became these towering black shapes pressing in on the clearing from every direction. The sky disappeared behind the canopy. The silence deepened into something immense and layered, not empty, but full of tiny, unidentifiable sounds. Clicks, rustles, the occasional crack of a branch somewhere far off in the timber. I told myself it was animals. Dear, maybe raccoons. I went inside, locked the door, and read by the dim yellow light of the single lamp on the nightstand until I fell asleep. The second night is when things shifted. I had spent the day hiking a trail that looped around the back of the property. It was a good day. Clear sky. Cold air. I felt better than I had in weeks. By the time evening came, I was tired in a healthy way, and I built another fire and settled into bed early. Around 10, I fell asleep quickly. I woke up at midnight, not slowly, the way you drift out of a dream, but suddenly, as if something had triggered a switch in my brain. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening. The fire had burned down 2 embers, and the cabin was filled with that low, orange half-light that makes every shadow move. The woods outside were quiet, almost too quiet. The ambient sounds I had gotten used to, the insects, the distant rustling, had stopped. There was only the faint ticking of the cabin walls cooling in the night air and the occasional soft pop from the dying fire. Then I heard it. A single footstep outside. Not close, but not far. Somewhere at the edge of the clearing, in the leaf litter between the trees. Just one. A slow, deliberate crunch. I held my breath and waltzed. 5 seconds. 10. Then another one. And another. Slow, measured steps, spaced unnaturally far apart in time. As if whoever or whatever was out there was stopping between each one to listen, the same way I was listening for them. I sat up in bed and looked toward the window. The glass was black. I couldn't see anything beyond the faint reflection of the ember glow. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was enormous. It pressed against the walls of the cabin like deep water. I sat there for what must have been 20 minutes, barely breathing, hearing nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was an animal. A deer moving through the clearing. Maybe a bear passing by. I lay back down and pulled the blanket up and eventually, reluctantly, fell back asleep. I woke again at 2:15 a.m. This time I knew exactly why. Something was touching the cabin. Not knocking, not scratching, dragging. A slow, soft drag along the exterior wall, right behind the head of my bed. It moved from one end of the wall to the other over the course of maybe 5 seconds, and then it stopped. I sat up so fast, the bed frame creaked beneath me. My heart was hammering. I stared at the wall, as if I could see through it. I waited, fists clenched around the blanket, jaw tight. It came again, the same sound, a slow, deliberate drag, moving back the other direction, like someone trailing their fingers along the wood planks as they walked past. My mind raced through explanations. A branch, a low-hanging branch scraping in the wind. But there was no wind. The air outside had been dead still all night. Got up. I went to the kitchen area and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast iron skillet, and I walked to the front door. I stood there with my hand on the lock for a long time. A very long time. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I unlocked the door and opened it slowly. The porch was empty. The clearing was a black void. I could see the shapes of trees at the far edges, barely visible against the fractionally lighter sky. But the ground between the cabin and the forest was pure darkness. I stood in the doorway, skillet in hand, and called out. My voice sounded small and ridiculous against the enormous silence. No one answered. Nothing moved. I closed the door, locked it, and dragged the small wooden table in front of it. I did not sleep again. The third night, I almost left. I nearly packed my things that afternoon and drove home. But in the daylight, the fear felt foolish. I walked the perimeter of the cabin and found nothing. No tracks. No marks on the walls. No sign that anything had been there. I told myself I had been half asleep, that the sounds had been distorted by the unfamiliar environment, that I was letting the isolation get to me. I decided to stay one more night, my last night, just to prove to myself that I could. By midnight, I was sitting upright in bed with the lamp on, reading, unable to relax enough to sleep. The forest was doing its usual symphony of small, distant sounds. Everything felt normal. I started to feel embarrassed about the previous night. At 1:40 a.m., someone knocked on the cabin door. 3 slow, even knocks, spaced apart, deliberate. The kind of knock a person makes when they know someone is inside and they want to be let in. I did not move. I did not breathe. I sat in bed and stared at the door across the room. The dim yellow lamp threw my shadow against the far wall, and I watched it tremble with my heartbeat. The knock did not come again, but I could hear something now, something I hadn't heard before. Breathing. Faint, steady breathing, just on the other side of the thin wooden door. Someone was standing on the porch. Someone was standing inches from the door, facing it, and waiting. I reached for my phone on instinct. No signal. I looked at the window to my left. Black glass. I looked at the window on the opposite wall, the one that faced the side of the clearing. There was a shape in it, not a reflection. A shape on the other side of the glass. It was dark, and it was still. And it was roughly the height and width of a person standing just outside the window looking in. I couldn't make out features. I couldn't see a face. It was just a dark mass against a dark background, barely distinguishable, perfectly motionless. I don't know how long I stared at it. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 5 minutes. My body had locked completely. Every muscle rigid. The shape did not move. It did not shift or sway. It simply stood there on the other side of the glass, and I understood with absolute certainty that it was looking at me. Then the lamp flickered, just once. A brief interruption in the light caused by the old wiring or a dip in the propane generator outside. It went dark for less than a second, and when it came back, the shape was gone. I left that night. I packed nothing. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and my wallet, and I walked to my car in the dark with the skillet still in my hand. I drove 25 minutes down the mountain in the pitch black, white-knuckled, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. When I finally hit the main road and saw streetlights, I pulled over and sat on the shoulder for 10 minutes with the doors locked, shaking. I called my friend the next day and told him what happened. He went quiet for a while. Then he told me something that put ice in my veins. He said that the last time he had been up there, a few months before, he had found something odd. Boot prints in the mud behind the cabin, near the back wall. Men's boots, a size or two larger than his own. He said he figured it was a hiker who had wandered through the property and he hadn't thought much of it. But then, he said something else. He said when he found those prints, he noticed that they didn't lead away from the cabin in any direction. They were just there, behind the back wall, as if someone had stood in that one spot for a long time and then simply vanished. I have never gone back. My friend still uses the cabin every fall. He says nothing has ever happened to him there. He says, I let my nerves get the best of me. Maybe he's right. But sometimes, late at night, when my apartment is quiet and I'm lying in bed in the dark, I think about that shape in the window. I think about how still it was, how patient. And I think about the fact that whoever was standing on that porch never tried to force the door open. They knocked politely. They waited, almost as if they already knew I would come back to check eventually. Almost as if they had all the time in the world. And the thing that keeps me awake, the thing I will never be able to stop thinking about, is a question I cannot answer. How many nights had they been out there before I finally heard them? I've lived alone for 3 years. I'm used to it. I'm used to the quiet. Used to the sounds my apartment makes when it settles at night. Used to the way the refrigerator hums in cycles, and the way the heating vent ticks when it kicks on in the early hours. I know every sound this place makes. I know which floorboard creaks near the bathroom. I know the specific rattle my bedroom window makes when the wind hits it at the right angle. I know this apartment the way you know your own breathing. You don't think about it until something interrupts the rhythm. Something interrupted the rhythm on a Tuesday night in January, and I haven't been the same since. I should describe the building so you understand the layout. It's an older complex. 5 stories. Brick exterior. Long, narrow hallways with carpet that probably hasn't been replaced since the 90s. The lighting in the hallways is fluorescent, but half the tubes are either dead or dying, so after dark the corridors exist in this sickly, inconsistent yellow glow that leaves patches of shadow between every few doors. My apartment is on the 3rd floor, near the end of the hallway. Unit 312. There's only one apartment past mine. Unit Tigaratos and Pablas, and it had been vacant for about 2 months at the time this happened. Beyond 314, the hallway deadens at a wall with a fire extinguisher mounted on it. So essentially, there was no reason for anyone to walk past my door. There was nothing beyond me except an empty apartment and a wall. That Tuesday night, I was up late. It was close to 1:30 in the morning. I was in bed with my laptop open, half watching something, half scrolling my phone. The apartment was dark, except for the screen glow, which threw this pale blue-white light across the sheets and the near wall, leaving everything else in shadow. The building was quiet. Not silent, because buildings like this are never truly silent, but quiet in that deep nighttime way where the few sounds that exist feel amplified. A pipe humming somewhere behind the walls, a faint bass note from a television 1 or 2 floors below, the occasional muffled thud of someone moving around in their apartment far down the hall. Normal sounds, familiar sounds. Then, at around 1:45, I heard something in the hallway outside my door. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was the soft sound of someone walking on carpet. Slow footsteps, muffled but distinct, approaching from the direction of the stairwell. I didn't think anything of it at first. People come home late. People work. Odd hours. The footsteps moved closer, passing what I estimated to be the apartments a few doors down from mine, and I expected them to stop at one of those doors. They didn't. They kept coming. Slow. Measured. Getting closer. They stopped directly outside my apartment. I paused the video on my laptop and looked toward the front door out of reflex. My apartment has a short entryway, maybe 5 feet from the door to where the living space opens up, and from my bed I could see the door at an angle. A thin line of hallway light glowed beneath it. I could see the faint interruption in that light where 2 shadows broke the gap. Someone was standing right outside my door. I waited for a knock. It didn't come. I waited for the footsteps to continue toward 314. They didn't. The person just stood there. 5 seconds. 10. 15. I was about to look away, about to convince myself it was someone checking their phone or fumbling for keys, when I heard it. The door handle moved. Not quickly. Not like someone confidently grabbing the handle to their own apartment. It was slow, a careful, almost cautious depression of the handle, as if whoever was on the other side was testing it, feeling whether it would give. The handle went down about halfway and then stopped because the deadbolt held it in place. There was a pause. A long, patient pause. Then the handle slowly returned to its original position. I sat up, in bed. My laptop slid against the sheets, and I caught it before it fell. My pulse had jumped, but my mind was still rationalizing. Wrong apartment. Someone on the wrong floor. It happens, especially late at night, especially if someone has been drinking. I expected to hear a confused murmur, maybe a quiet laugh, and then footsteps retreating back down the hall. Instead, there was silence. The shadows beneath the door didn't move. Whoever was out there was still standing in front of my apartment, completely still, apparently undisturbed by the fact that the handle hadn't turned. 30 seconds passed. Then the handle moved again, the exact same way. Slow. Deliberate. Testing the resistance. The deadbolt caught it. The handle paused, then it returned to its resting position. No knock. No voice. No attempt to identify themselves or apologize for the wrong door. Who's that slow mechanical testing of the handle? As if the person was simply checking whether the lock had somehow changed in the last 30 seconds. I got out of bed. I moved quietly down the short hallway toward the front door. I had the irrational urge to hold my breath, as if the person on the other side might hear me breathing through the wood. I reached the door and leaned toward the peephole. The hallway outside was dim. One of the nearest fluorescent tubes was completely dead, and the one beyond it was flickering in that barely perceptible way that casts everything in a slightly unstable light. Through the small fisheye lens of the peephole, I could see a figure standing directly in front of my door, facing it. They were close. Very close. Less than a foot from the door itself. I could make out a dark jacket or hoodie. The fabric pulled up so it obscured the top of the head. The hallway lighting was too weak and the angle too narrow for me to see a face. Just the shape of a person standing motionless in front of my door in the middle of the night. I almost said something. The words were in my throat. Can I help you? Wrong door. But something stopped me. Something about the stillness of the figure. Something about the way they just stood there, facing the door. Not fidgeting. Not swaying. Not doing any of the things a confused or drunk person does. They were perfectly still in a way that felt intentional. Practiced. Like someone who was comfortable waiting. I stepped back from the peephole. I moved silently to the kitchen counter where my phone was charging and I picked it up. ready to call someone, the front desk, a friend, the police. But I hesitated. What would I even say? Someone tried my door handle. They're standing in the hallway. They haven't done anything threatening. They haven't said a word. I stared at the phone screen, the bright light stinging my eyes in the dark apartment, and I listened. For almost 2 full minutes, nothing happened. The silence was excruciating. I began to wonder if they had left, if I had somehow missed the sound of footsteps retreating. I crept back to the peephole and looked. They were still there, but they had moved closer. The figure was now pressed nearly against the door. Through the tiny lens, all I could see was fabric. Dark, featureless fabric filling the entire peephole, inches from the other side. They were standing so close that they could have been leaning against the door, their face directly next to the peephole, as if they knew I was looking and wanted to make sure I couldn't see them clearly. I backed away from the door so fast, nearly tripped in the dark. My shoulder hit the wall of the narrow entryway and I pressed myself against it, staring at the door. The thin line of light at the bottom was almost entirely blocked now. The shadows beneath the door had moved forward, flush against the threshold. Then the handle moved a third time. Same speed, same patins, slow and careful and methodical. But this time after it stopped and returned to position, I heard something that drained every ounce of warmth from my body, a whisper. Soft, almost inaudible, right at the seam of the door. I couldn't make out words. I don't even know if it was words. It was just a faint, breathy murmur, like someone speaking to themselves, or to me. Through the crack between the door and the frame. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then it stopped. I called the police. I stood in my kitchen in the dark and whispered into the phone that someone was outside my apartment and they were trying to get in. The dispatcher asked me questions, and I answered them as quietly as I could. She said a unit was on the way. I stood there gripping a kitchen knife in one hand and my phone in the other, eyes locked on the front door. The shadows were still there at the bottom. The figure hadn't moved. It took the police 11 minutes to arrive. I know because I watched every second tick by on my phone. At some point during those 11 minutes, maybe around minute 6 or 7, the shadows beneath the door shifted. I heard one soft footstep, then another, moving away. Slowly. The same measured, unhurried pace as before. They faded down the hallway, toward the stairwell, and then disappeared. When the officers arrived, they checked the hallway. They checked the stairwell. They checked the vacant unit next to mine, which was locked. They walked the building. They found no one. One of the officers told me it was probably someone on the wrong floor. He said, "It happens more than people think." He told me to make sure my deadbolt was always engaged and to call again if it happened a second time. They left. I sat on my kitchen floor with the lights on until sunrise. It didn't happen again the next night, or the night after. But 4 days later, when I came home from work in the evening, I stopped in front of my door to unlock it, and I glanced down. There was something on the carpet, right at the base of the door, placed precisely in the center of the doorframe. A small, folded piece of paper. I picked it up and unfolded it. It was a sketch done in pencil. Simple lines drawn with a careful hand. It was the layout of my apartment. The entryway, the kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom, the windows, all of it, roughly but clearly mapped out from above, like a floor plan. Near the spot that represented my bed, there was a small circle drawn in ink, and next to it in tiny, neat handwriting was a single word. Here. I moved out within the week. I never found out who drew it. I never found out how they knew the layout of my apartment. I never found out how long they had been watching before that Tuesday night. But what haunts me most, what I think about every time I lock a door, is something I noticed in the drawing that I didn't register until days later, after I was already gone. The sketch included a detail that you wouldn't see from outside the apartment. It showed the short entryway, the angle of the kitchen counter, the position of the bed relative to the window. Whoever drew that floor plan hadn't guessed the layout. They had been inside before. I drive long distances for work. Regional sales, The kind of job that puts you on empty highways at hours no reasonable person should be awake. You do it long enough, and you stop noticing the loneliness of the road. The dark stretches between cities become routine. The silence becomes background noise. You learn to run on gas station coffee and podcasts, and the dull rhythm of lane markings disappearing under your headlights. I've driven thousands of miles alone at night, and I have never once felt afraid on the road. Until one night last March, somewhere on a 2-lane highway in the rural stretch between Amarillo and Albuquerque. I had left later than I should have. A meeting ran long and I didn't hit the road until almost 10 at night, which meant I was looking at a solid 5-hour drive through some of the emptiest landscape in the country. West Texas into New Mexico. Flat, open, dark. The kind of terrain where you can drive for 40 minutes without seeing a single light that isn't your own headlights reflected off a road sign. I didn't mind. I had done the drive before. I had a full tank, a large coffee, and a clear forecast. By 1:30 in the morning, the coffee was gone, and the fuel gauge was dipping toward a quarter tank. I wasn't worried yet, but I knew the next reliable stop was still a ways off, and I didn't want to gamble on fumes out here. There's no cell signal for long stretches of this highway. Running out of gas would mean sitting on the shoulder in total darkness waiting for someone to pass. And at this hour, that could be a very long wait. So when I saw a faint glow on the horizon, a small cluster of lights just off the highway about a mile ahead, I felt a wave of relief. As I got closer, the lights took shape. A gas station. Small. 2 pumps under a flat metal canopy. A squat rectangular building behind them with a lit sign in the window. The sign was on, the canopy lights were on, and the store appeared to be open. I put on my turn signal out of habit, even though there wasn't another car in sight, and pulled off the highway into the lot. The first thing I noticed was the silence. When I turned off my engine and opened the door, the quiet hit me like a pressure change. There was nothing out here. No ambient sound from a nearby town. No trucks on the highway. No hum of neighboring buildings, who stay when dry and cold, pushing across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot and making the canopy above the pumps vibrate with a low, metallic hum. The gas station lights buzzed and flickered in that uneven way that old fluorescent tubes do when they're close to dying. The light they cast was a harsh, greenish white that made everything look slightly overexposed and left the edges of the lot in deep shadow. I got out and stretched. The air was cold for March, sharp enough to sting the inside of my nose. I walked to the pump and reached for the nozzle and then stopped. The pump screen was off, not displaying a default message or a price. Just off, dead black screen. I tried the buttons. Nothing. I moved to the second pump. Same thing. Dark screen, no response. I looked toward the store. The lights were on inside. I could see the fluorescent ceiling panels glowing through the glass door. The neon open sign in the window was lit, buzzing faintly. But I couldn't see anyone inside. The store appeared empty. I walked across the lot toward the entrance. The glass door had a paper schedule taped to the inside, listing the station's hours. According to the schedule, the station closed at 11 p.m. on weeknights. It was almost 2 in the morning. The sign said open. The schedule said closed. I almost turned around, but my gas situation wasn't comfortable enough to gamble. So I pulled the door handle. It opened. A small electronic chime sounded as I stepped inside. The store was tiny. 3 short aisles of snacks and automotive supplies. A cooler along the back wall, humming loudly. A counter near the door with a register and a rack of lighters and cheap sunglasses. The air inside was warm and stale and carried a faint chemical smell, like cleaning solution that had been sprayed hours ago and never wiped away. The overhead lights were bright, but one of the tubes in the back was flickering rapidly, casting a strobe-like pulse across the last aisle. No one was behind the counter. I stood there for a moment, looking around, waiting for someone to emerge from a back room. There was a door behind the counter marked employees only. It was slightly ajar. I called out, "Hello, anybody here?" My voice sounded wrong in the small space, too loud, immediately absorbed by the low ceiling and the packed shelves. No one answered. I waited. The cooler hummed. The fluorescent tube flickered. The wind outside pushed against the glass door and made it rattle softly in its frame. I called out again, louder this time. I heard something behind the employee door. A chair moving. A slow, scraping shift, like someone adjusting their weight. Then footsteps, slow and unhurried, approaching the door. A man stepped out. He was maybe 50, thin, wearing a dark flannel shirt and jeans. He had a weathered face, deep lines around the mouth and eyes, and his hair was uncombed and pushed to one side. He didn't greet me. He didn't smile. He stepped behind the counter and placed both hands flat on its surface and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as blank. Not hostile, not friendly, just absolutely, completely neutral, like a machine waiting for an input. I told him the pumps weren't working and asked if I could get some gas. He stared at me for a moment longer than was comfortable, then turned and looked at a small monitor behind the counter that appeared to be connected to the pump system. He pressed a button. He didn't say a word. He just pointed one finger toward the pumps outside. I thanked him and turned to leave. As I reached the door, I glanced to my right down the last aisle, and I stopped. There was someone else in the store. A man standing at the far end of the aisle near the flickering light, facing the cooler. He wasn't browsing. He wasn't holding anything. He was just standing there with his arms at his sides, facing the glass doors of the cooler, completely motionless. He was wearing a dark jacket and work boots, and his back was to me. I hadn't seen him when I walked in. I was certain the store had been empty. I would have noticed another person in a space this small. I looked back at the attendant behind the counter. He was watching me. His expression hadn't changed. He glanced briefly toward the man at the end of the aisle, and then back at me. Something shifted in his eyes. Not alarm exactly, something more subtle, something that looked almost like recognition, as if this was a scene he had witnessed before and he already knew how it played out. I pushed through the door and walked back to my car faster than I should have. The pump screen was on now, glowing with the standard fuel selection menu. I grabbed the nozzle and started pumping. My hands were not steady. I stood with my back to the car and my eyes on the store, watching through the glass. The attendant was still behind the counter. The other man was still standing at the end of the aisle. Neither of them had moved. The gas pumped slowly, agonizingly slowly. The numbers on the screen crawled upward, and I stood there in the cold wind under the flickering canopy lights, watching the store, watching the lot, watching the dark edges of the property where the light dissolved into absolute blackness. The highway behind me was empty in both directions. I was completely alone out here with these two men, and a gas station that should have been closed hours ago. The pump clicked off. I hung up the nozzle and got in my car and started the engine. As I pulled forward toward the lot exit, my headlights swept across the side of the building and I saw something that made my stomach drop. There was a third person standing at the corner of the building, just beyond the reach of the canopy light, leaning against the wall with their arms crossed. They were watching my car. I couldn't make out a face or any distinguishing features, just a figure in dark clothing standing perfectly still at the edge of the building, half in shadow watching me pull away. I hadn't seen them arrive. I hadn't heard another car. They had simply been there, in the dark, the entire time I was pumping gas. I pulled onto the highway and accelerated hard. My headlights cut through the darkness ahead and the gas station shrank in my rearview mirror, a small island of sick greenish light in an ocean of black. I watched it until it disappeared behind me, and just before it did, I saw something that I still think about almost every single night. The lights went off. All of them. The canopy, the store, sign, everything. The station went completely dark the moment I was far enough down the road, as if the whole place had been turned on just for me, and now that I was leaving it, had served its purpose. I drove the remaining 3 hours to Albuquerque without stopping. When I got to my hotel, I sat in the parking lot for a long time with the engine running and the doors locked, trying to convince myself that I had imagined the timing, that the lights going off was a coincidence, that the man in the aisle and the figure at the corner of the building were just employees or locals, and that the attendants. Silence was just the exhaustion of a night shift. The next day, before I left the hotel, I searched for the gas station. I looked up every station along that stretch of highway using 3 different map apps. I found 2, both of them at least 30 miles from where I had stopped. Both of them branded with major fuel company logos. There was nothing listed where I had pulled over. No pin on the map. No business listing. No address. According to every map and directory I could find, there was no gas station at that location. I made the return trip during daylight. I watched the mile markers carefully. I slowed down when I reached the approximate area where I had stopped. I looked for the turnoff, the lot, the canopy, anything. There was nothing there, just flat empty land stretching to the horizon on both sides of the highway, dry grass and dust and silence, without a single structure in sight. I'd been driving for 11 hours when I saw the sign, a faded rectangle of white plastic, backlit by a single fluorescent tube that hummed and stuttered against the dark. It read Clover Rest Motor Lodge, vacancy $38 night. The C in Clover was burned out, so it just read Love Rest. And honestly, that should have been enough of a sign on its own, but my eyes were dry and my back ached. And I'd already passed the last rest stop 40 miles ago. The highway stretched ahead of me, flat and featureless, and I hadn't seen another pair of headlights in over 20 minutes. It was 1:15 in the morning. I took the exit. The motel sat about 200 yards off the highway, connected by a cracked frontage road with no streetlights. My headlights swept across the building as I pulled into the lot. It was a single-story L-shaped structure, maybe 16 rooms, with exterior doors that all faced the parking lot. The kind of place built in the 70s and maintained only in the loosest definition of the word. The exterior was painted a color that might have once been beige, but it turned the shade of old bandage. Each room had a small window with heavy curtains drawn shut and a dim yellow bulb mounted above the door. About half the bulbs were working. The rest left their doorways in darkness. There were 3 cars in the lot. One was parked directly in front of a room on the far end. One was near the office. The third was backed into a space near the middle of the building, positioned oddly, facing outward as if whoever parked it wanted to be able to leave quickly. I parked near the office and sat in my car for a moment, engine idling. Something about the silence outside felt heavy, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel like peace. It felt like absence, like the place where sound had been removed. He went inside. The office was a small room with a counter, a rack of faded tourist brochures for attractions that probably no longer existed, and a television mounted on the wall playing an infomercial with the volume turned almost all the way down. The floor was brown, linoleum, peeling at the edges. Behind the counter sat a man, thin, maybe mid-50s, with deep-set eyes and a collared shirt that was buttoned all the way up to his throat. He was just sitting there, not watching the television, not reading, not doing anything. His hands were flat on the counter in front of him. When I pushed open the glass door, a small bell chimed, and he looked up at me with an expression that wasn't surprise or welcome. It was something closer to recognition, like he had been expecting me. He asked, "How many nights?" I said 1. He asked if I wanted a room on the left side or the right side of the building. I didn't know what difference it made, so I said it didn't matter. He paused at that, just a beat too long. Then he said he'd put me on the right side, room 12, and slid a key across the counter. Not a key card, an actual metal key on a plastic fob with the number scratched into it. I paid cash. He wrote something in a logbook, not on a computer, a physical logbook, and I noticed the page was mostly empty. Only 2 other entries above mine. He didn't ask for my name or 10. He just wrote the room number, the date, and what looked like a single word next to it that I couldn't read upside down. I asked if there was anything nearby for breakfast in the morning. He stared at me for a moment and said, "Most people leave early. Not there's a diner down the road. Not checkouts at 11. Just that? Most people leave early? I took the key and walked out. Room 12 was near the end of the right wing. The bulb above the door was working, but barely. It gave off a jaundiced, sickly light that didn't so much illuminate the area as stain it. I put the key in the lock and had to jiggle it hard before the door gave way, swinging inward with a slow groan from the hinges. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not mildew exactly, but something stale and close, like the room had been sealed for a long time and the air inside had simply given up. There was a bed with a quilted bedspread that had a pattern of small flowers, faded to almost nothing. A nightstand with a lamp, a television buoyed to a low dresser, a bathroom with the door half open, showing a sliver of white tile and a rust stain trailing down from the faucet into the sink. I set my bag down and locked the door. There was a deadbolt and a chain, and I used both, The curtains were thick and dark, and I left them closed. I sat on the edge of the bed, and the mattress sank unevenly beneath me, and I told myself it was fine. One night, just sleep and leave. I brushed my teeth in the bathroom and tried not to look too closely at the grout between the tiles. When I turned off the bathroom light and came back into the room, I noticed something. The wall between my room and room 11, the room next door, was thin, very thin. And through it, I could hear something. Not voices, not a television, just a faint, rhythmic sound, like someone tapping a fingertip against a hard surface. Tap, 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 slow and deliberate. It went on for about a minute, then stopped. I stood still and listened. Nothing. I turned off the lamp and got into bed. I couldn't sleep. The mattress had a shallow depression in the center that my body kept rolling into no matter how I positioned myself. The pillow smelled like industrial detergent, sharp and chemical. I lay there in the dark, staring at the coiling, and I became aware of how many small sounds existed in that room. The hum of the mini fridge in the corner, a faint ticking from the wall, maybe pipes, and outside, every few minutes, a soft sound I couldn't identify. A creak or a footstep, something out on the concrete walkway that ran in front of the rooms. At some point I reached for my phone to check the time, to 17 a.m. As the screen lit up my face, I glanced toward the window and noticed something that made my breath catch. The curtains were thick, but they didn't quite meet in the center. There was a gap, maybe half an inch, where the two panels didn't overlap, and through that gap, I could see the yellow glow of the exterior light. It was interrupted. Something was blocking part of it. A shape, standing close to the window, just on the other side of the glass. I didn't move. I lay there with my phone still glowing in my hand and stared at that gap in the curtains. The shape didn't move either. It stayed there, a dark, vertical interruption in the light, perfectly still, for what felt like a full minute. Then it shifted, slowly, and the light returned to the gap as whatever had been standing there moved away. I heard a single soft footstep on the concrete, then nothing. I got up and pressed my eye to the gap in the curtains. The walkway outside was empty. The parking lot was the same. 3 cars. No one visible, but the light above room 11's door, which I was almost certain had been off when I arrived, was now on. And the door to room 11 was open about 3 inches. Just a dark sliver of space. I've watched it for a long time, waiting for movement. Primera. Sa W noni. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there with my eyes open, listening. Around 3 a.m., the tapping started again through the wall. This time, it was different. It wasn't a single fingertip. It was a flat palm, pressing against the wall and then releasing. A slow, almost gentle sound, like someone testing the surface, feeling for something. It traveled. It started near the headboard and moved, gradually toward the foot of the bed, as if the person on the other side was walking along the length of the wall, dragging their hand across it. It stopped when it reached the corner. Then, very faintly, I heard a sound that I am certain of even now. A whisper. Not words I could make out, just the cadence of a human voice, pressed close to the wall, murmuring something meant only for the person on the other side to hear. I got dressed. In the dark. I packed my bag as quietly as I could. I left the key on the nightstand and opened the door just enough to slip through. The walkway was empty. The air outside was cold and tasted like dust and exhaust from the distant highway. I walked quickly to my car, got in, locked the doors, and pulled out of the lot. As I turned onto the frontage road, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The office light was still on, and the man behind the counter was standing at the glass door, watching me leave. He was just standing there with one hand raised slightly, pressed flat against the glass. Not waving, just holding his hand there, pale against the dark interior, like he was measuring the distance between us. I drove for 2 hours before I stopped again. When the sun came up, I pulled into a gas station and went inside to buy coffee. I stood at the counter, and while I was waiting, I pulled up the motel on my phone. I don't know what I expected to find, a website, maybe, or reviews from other travelers. But there was nothing. No listing. No reviews. No address that matched what my GPS showed. I searched the name, Clover Rest Motor Lodge. And the only result was a brief county planning document from 9 years ago, requesting demolition permits for an abandoned property on that same frontage road. I went back to my car and sat there for a while. The coffee got cold in my hand. I thought about room 11, about the open door and the hand moving along the wall, about the logbook on the counter and the single word the clerk had written next to my room number that I couldn't read. I've driven that same highway twice since then. Both times, I watched for the exit. Both times, I found the frontage road, but the motel was dark, every window black, every door closed, and the sign out front was unlit. The parking lot was empty except for a single car, backed into a space near the middle of the building, still facing outward. The same car. I'm almost sure of it. I didn't stop. I don't think I'll ever stop there again. But some nights, when I'm in a hotel, in some other city, in some clan, well-lit room with a functioning deadbolt and bright white walls, I still wake up around 2 a.m. and listen to the wall beside my bed. And sometimes, just for a moment, I think I hear it. That slow, patient tapping. And then it stops, and the silence that follows is the worst part. Because silence like that doesn't mean no one is there. It means whoever is there has decided to be quiet. I took the job because it paid $4 more per hour than the day shift, and because I was told almost nothing ever happened. That was the phrase the supervisor used during training. Almost nothing ever happens. You walk the floors, you check the locks, you watch the cameras, and you go home at 6 in the morning. He said it like he was selling me a vacation, and for the first 3 weeks, he was right. Almost nothing happened until the night something did. The building was a 7-story commercial complex on the east side of the city. During the day, it held maybe 300 people across a handful of businesses. An insurance company on floors 2 and 3. A tech startup on 5. A medical billing office on 6. The ground floor had a lobby with a reception desk that nobody sat at after 7 p.m. And the 7th floor had been vacant for over a year. Still fitted with desks and cubicle walls from whatever company had last leased it. My job was simple. I started at 11, relieved the evening guard, and stayed until morning. I had a desk in a small security office behind the lobby for monitors showing rotating camera feeds, a flashlight, a radio that connected to a dispatch service I never once had reason to call, and a ring of keys that opened every door in the building. For 3 weeks, the hardest part of the job was staying awake. The building at night was a different world than it was during the day. The lights in the hallways dimmed automatically after 9. Dropping to a low-power mode that left everything in a pale, bluish wash. The air conditioning ran on a reduced cycle, and it created a constant low hum through the vents that became a kind of white noise. You could hear it everywhere, in the stairwells, in the hallways, in the elevator lobbies on each floor. It filled the silence without breaking it, and after a while it became the silence, like the building was breathing in its sleep. I did my first walkthrough at midnight, every shift. Ground floor, then up through each level, checking doors, testing handles, scanning hallways with my flashlight even though the emergency lighting kept things just bright enough to see. The floors were all the same. Long corridors with office doors on either side, most of them locked, some with frosted glass panels that showed dark rooms beyond. The carpet muffled my footsteps, the ceiling tiles absorbed every sound. Walking through those hallways felt like moving through something that had been sealed and preserved, like the air itself was holding still. On the night in question, I started my midnight round the same way I always did. Ground floor was clear. 2nd floor, clear. I took the stairs between floors because the sound of the elevator arriving on an empty floor unsettled me in a way I couldn't justify. 3rd floor was clear. 4th floor, which was mostly storage and a large conference space, was clear. I reached the 5th floor and started down the main corridor, and that was when I noticed the first thing that was wrong. There was a door open near the end of the hall. Suite 514. It was a small office that belonged to the tech company, and it was always locked. I had checked it on every shift for 3 weeks, and it had never once been open. But now it was not wide open, just slightly ajar, maybe 4 inches, with a thin line of darkness visible through the gap. I stood in the hallway and looked at it for a long moment. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder up here, and beneath it I thought I heard something. A faint, irregular sound, like a desk drawer sliding open and then slowly sliding shut. I walked to the door and pushed it open with my flashlight. The beam swept across a small room with 2 desks, a bookshelf, and a window that overlooked the parking lot. The room was empty. Nothing out of place. I checked the lock, and it was functional. I pulled the door shut until it clicked and tested the handle. Locked. I wrote it down in my log and moved on. But something had shifted in my chest. A small, cold awareness that I was paying attention now in a way I hadn't been before. I finished the 5th floor and went up to 6. The medical billing office took up the entire level, an open floor plan with dozens of workstations separated by low partitions. The overhead lights were off, but the emergency strips along the baseboards created a low glow that gave the room a strange, underwater quality. Monitors were dark. Chairs were tucked in. Everything was exactly as it should be. But as I stood in the doorway and swept my light across the room, I felt something I hadn't felt before on this job. I felt like I was being looked at. Not from any specific direction, just a general, sourceless awareness, like the sensation of someone standing behind you in a line, close enough that you can feel the warmth of them. I finished the sweep quickly and took the stairs up to 7. The vacant floor. This was always the part of the round I hoped. At least, the 7th floor still had all its furniture, but none of its life. Desks with nothing on them. Cubicle walls with bare pushpin holes where photos and calendars had once hung. Rolling chairs positioned at odd angles, as if the people sitting in them had simply evaporated. The lights up here were on a separate system, and half of them didn't work at all, leaving large sections of the floor in near total darkness. I walked the perimeter, checked the emergency exits, and shone my flashlight into the darker corners. Everything was still. I left and went back downstairs to my desk. It was 12:40 a.m. I sat down and looked at the monitors. The feeds cycled through cameras on each floor in 15-second intervals. Lobby, parking lot, 2nd floor corridor, 3rd floor corridor. I watched them rotate through twice, and on the 3rd cycle, something caught my attention. The camera on the 5th floor showed the hallway where I had found suite 514 open. The image was grainy and slightly overexposed by the emergency lighting, but at the far end of the corridor, just at the edge of the frame, there was a shape that I didn't think had been there before. It was dark and indistinct, and it could have been a piece of furniture or a shadow cast by the angle of the baseboard lights, but it was positioned in the center of the hallway, not against the wall, and it had a vertical quality to it that made my eyes stay on it too long. Before I could study it further, the feed cycled to the next camera. I waited for the rotation to come back around. 15 seconds for each of the 12 cameras. 3 minutes for a full cycle. I counted them off when the 5th floor corridor appeared again. The shape was gone. I sat very still for a moment. Then I picked up my flashlight and went back to the 5th floor. The hallway was empty. Suite 514 was still locked. I walked the entire length of the corridor and found nothing, but the feeling from the 6th floor had followed me here. That prickling awareness on the back of my neck. That sense of presence, without evidence. I returned to the security office and decided to stay at the monitors for a while. I poured coffee from my thermos and watched the feeds. For an hour, nothing happened. The building was motionless, just corridors and empty lobbies and the parking lot where my car sat alone under a light. At 2:15 a.m., the elevator chimed. I heard it from the security office, a single, clear tone. The sound the elevator makes when it arrives at a floor. The thing was, I hadn't called the elevator. No one had. The system was supposed to go into standby after hours, resting on the ground floor unless activated. I looked at the monitor that showed the lobby elevator doors. They were closed. I switched to the camera inside the elevator car. It was empty, but the floor indicator above the doors in the lobby showed that the car was on the 7th floor. I watched the monitor. After about 30 seconds, the elevator began to descend. I could see the numbers changing on the indicator. 7, 6, 5. It stopped on 4. The doors opened, visible on the 4th floor camera. The hallway beyond was empty. No one got on. The doors stayed open for 10 seconds, then closed. The elevator continued down. 3, 2. It arrived at the lobby with another chime, and the doors opened to an empty car. I got up and walked to the elevator. I looked inside. The fluorescent light in the ceiling of the car was bright and harsh compared to the dimmed lobby. The walls were mirrored, and I saw my own reflection looking back at me, pale and tired. The car was empty. There was nothing wrong with it, but the floor indicator confirmed it had come from 7, and it had stopped on 4. And no one in this building should have been able to make that happen except me. I did not go back up to the 7th floor. I know that sounds like the wrong decision. I know that in the retelling, it seems obvious that I should have investigated. But standing there at 2 in the morning, alone in a building that was supposed to be empty, listening to the echo of that elevator chime still ringing faintly in the lobby, every instinct I had told me to stay where I was. So I went back to my desk. I sat down, and I watched the monitors until my shift ended. Nothing else happened on camera. No shapes in hallways, no doors opening, no elevator movement. The building was perfectly still for the remaining hours. And when the morning guard arrived at 6, I gave him a normal report. I mentioned the elevator and the open door on 5. He shrugged and said the elevator did that sometimes. Old wiring. He didn't address the door. I walked out to my car as the sun was coming up and the world was turning gray and ordinary. I unlocked the door and got in, and as I adjusted my mirror to back out, I saw something that made me stop. On the 7th floor of the building, and one of the windows overlooking the parking lot, the lights were on. Not the dim emergency strips, the full overhead lights, blazing white against the early morning sky. And standing at the window, barely visible against the glare, was the silhouette of a person. They were motionless. They were looking down at the parking lot, and from the angle of their posture, they were looking directly at my car. I drove out of the lot and called the supervisor that afternoon and told him I wouldn't be returning. He asked why. I told him about the elevator and the door and the figure in the window. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me something that I haven't stopped thinking about since. He said the 7th floor had been vacant for 14 months. He said the company that had leased it left suddenly, in the middle of their contract, and that they had never given a reason. He said 3 night guards had quit before me, all within their first month. Then he said something else. He said the building's key audit showed that 2 master keys from the original set had never been returned. They'd been marked as lost over a year ago. No one had ever changed the locks. I hung up the phone and sat there for a while. I thought about those dark sections on the 7th floor where the lights